Well, hello. My name is Maridel Barr, and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast today, in which we're going to explore some mystical truths and discover spiritual messages and teachings as revealed in the work of Edgar Cayce. Known as the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce lived from 1877 to 1945, and he conducted thousands of psychic readings in a self-induced trance. His wife Gertrude leading him through the reading, and his secretary Gladys Davis recorded over 14,000 of these readings. He began with health topics and gradually expanded into other topics, including ancient mysteries, Atlantis, reincarnation, and dreams. He even did prophecies of future events. His legacy is carried on by the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. As a member of the Association for Research and Enlightenment of Northern California, I invite you to join us as we explore these files of the modern mystic Edgar Cayce. Several times a month, we will entertain guests with a connection to the Cayce work, be they scholars, researchers, psychics, or regular people who work with the topics Cayce channeled in more than 14,000 readings. Let me introduce Mark Thurston, PhD, educator and well-known author and speaker on Cayce's work and legacy. Mark worked at the Association for Research and Enlightenment for many years and is now an associate professor at George Mason University. Also, we have Mary Elizabeth Lynch, JD. She is a retired attorney and mediator who is currently an educator in the field of spirituality, peace, and integrative health. She's an adjunct professor at George Mason University. And as president and senior course leader for the nonprofit educational organization, the Personal Transformation and Courage Institute, which she co-founded with her husband, Mark. Welcome, Mark Thurston and Mary Elizabeth Lynch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maridel.
I'm so happy to have you here. So today we are going to be talking about our upcoming retreat at the Asilomar Conference grounds in Pacific Grove, California, which will be held on October 3rd through 5th of this year. The conference is titled Finding Spiritual Joy in Chaotic Times. I can't wait to get a preview of what you two are going to be talking about. And I'd like to let everybody know that they can find out more about our retreat, which is sponsored by the ARE of Northern California, by going to www.edgarcayceca.org. We will also have a link in the description below. And we're going to be talking about Asilomar and this wonderful retreat, which we are planning for you all. But first, let me begin by asking you a little bit about yourself and your connection to the Cayce work. I would love to hear your discovery of Edgar Cayce's story. How and when did you first discover the work of Edgar Cayce, Mark?
So I was actually a senior in high school living in the Washington, D.C. suburbs in the late 1960s. And it was a time in my life when I was very interested in science and mathematics, but I was also deeply involved in my church, my Protestant Christianity, and those seemed like two very different worlds to me. And
Mm.
um, I came across the Edgar Cayce readings when Edgar Cayce's son, Hughlin Cayce, and an author named Jess Stern appeared on the Mike Douglas talk show one afternoon. And my sister and I happened to be watching this, and he was talking about the book Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet. And we were both so interested and excited by what we were hearing on TV. We went out and bought a copy of the book. And as I read that book over the next week or 10 days, I began to see that maybe in Cayce's teachings there was a bridge between the scientific side of myself and the sort of religious studies side of myself. And that led to my engagement with the material, even while I was in college, joining an ARE, a Search for God study group. And after I finished college, I moved to Virginia Beach and was lucky enough to get a job working there on the staff.
Wow, that's amazing. Mary Elizabeth, and how about you? How did you discover the work of Edgar Cayce?
I was introduced to the Cayce readings about the same time that I was introduced to Buddhist teaching. So I was in my early 20s in college, and I took an interim course between semesters. And one of my professors, I was at a Catholic university, decided he wanted to explore Buddhism. And so we started to put ourselves in a very pretzely positions on the floor, lotus position, trying to meditate. And I remember that so distinctly because the whole process of meditation just seemed very familiar to me and very natural to me, even though I had to get my body on board with it. It was shortly after that, after I graduated from college, I took a job at a Catholic and Jewish girls' school in Kansas City, Missouri.
Mm.
Apparently, Catholic girls and Jewish girls were not allowed in a lot of the private schools in Kansas City, Missouri. So a Catholic group of nuns started a school just for them. I was only 22, and I was hired to teach philosophy and religion. I was also put in charge of the religious ed department at this school. I found out very quickly that the part-time teachers in the religious ed department were all Cayce study group members.
Wow.
And our departmental meetings very quickly turned into a Cayce study group. And so I continued to develop my study and my love of both the Cayce readings and Buddhist wisdom teachings at the same time. They're sort of the two bookends for me.
Mm.
And I find that they illuminate each other, and I move back and forth very easily between them and use the wisdom teachings to help me explore even more deeply my own spiritual journey.
Wow, that's really interesting. Who would have thought there would be Edgar Cayce study groups in such a school setting? Fascinating. So, and this is, I guess we'll go back to Mark for this question. I was wondering, like, do you have like are there any like specific Cayce readings or ideas that have really deeply influenced your worldview?
Well, there's certainly topics that have been very important to me. I even was invited to write and publish a book called The Essential Edgar Cayce about 20 years ago by a mainstream New York City publisher. And that was a really fascinating opportunity to me, in part because I didn't have to sell a book proposal to a publisher. They were calling, asking if I would write the book. And I picked 15 readings that I thought were the most significant readings Cayce gave, non-health readings. And I think in those readings, there were central points that have really, for me, been at the heart of his philosophy. There's this important concept about the influence of our intentionality and our values and our ideals on everything that we do in life. There's also in the Cayce material this synthesis between sort of the Judeo-Christian world, the sort of Western worldview, and concepts that we've traditionally thought of as coming out of Eastern religions, although they can also be found in esoteric traditions within the West. But this sort of blending of East and West. I think another core concept is just how important the physical body is.
Mm.
Probably Edgar Cayce became famous because of some of his predictions and prophecies, but he only gave about 24 readings out of 14,000 that are prophetic readings, and two-thirds of his 14,000 plus readings are about health and about the physical body. And
Mm.
I think just the fact of that ratio, that percentage suggests something really important about spirituality, that it rests upon the physical body. And it's not that there's something wrong with having a body. It's not a Gnostic type notion of our being trapped in materiality, but instead seeing our physical experience as a great opportunity.
So are you saying that, I mean, do you feel that part of the focus for health readings of the physical body was to get the individual into good shape so that they could sort of pursue their spiritual discoveries or connection with source?
Well, I think on the one hand, people came to Edgar Cayce with problems, and
Mhm.
a lot of people's primary problem has to do with their health. But at the same time, he might have had his work focus more just on sort of spiritual, metaphysical kinds of readings. He was warmly embracive of working with people around their body, around their health, around their physical attunement. And I think that says a lot about the sort of position of the source of the readings about the significance of the body and the sort of the sacredness of being in the earth and having a physical body. And I don't think we understand the Casey material unless we appreciate that fact.
That's a really interesting thought because there's that whole, like you alluded to before, realm of just denying the body and just, you know, almost like seeing like the body is something to be set aside in pursuit of spiritual. But this is different. This is giving like, the mind, body, spirit, like the three sides. Um, or Casey often talks about mind, body, spirit,
That all three are a manifestation of a oneness, an underlying oneness.
or
And
all three are
unless we see
sacred.
the body as sacred, it's hard for us to see how the body is part of that oneness.
Oh, wow. That's really a gem, a truth that um, I really hadn't thought about that much. So thank you. Thank you for that. That's beautiful. Um, Now, Mary Elizabeth, you mentioned that you have the two bookends, you have the Casey work and then the Buddhist teachings that really help your or form your philosophy. And I'm wondering, like for you, what would be like the specific Casey ideas that have really deeply influenced and maybe working together with the Buddhist philosophy?
Yeah. Well, I'd sort of like to piggyback on the discussion that you and Mark are having about the physical body, because in Buddhism, the senses, the physical body, is really a portal into the spiritual world. And I think we've lost touch with that in our
Mm,
Western views of the body, medical views of the body, but even spiritual views of the body. Um, we have this saying, I hear it all the time, that we are spiritual beings having a material experience. But I think that's just half the story. Casey says that a half truth is worse than a whole lie
mm,
because it deceiveth the soul. I think the other part of that truth is that the material is a spiritual experience. The material is spiritual. And if we believe that it's not, and Casey even says the body is a temple, if we hold the belief in our minds that the material is somehow less than, not as valuable as, then you see how that opens the way for us to mistreat the physical. I
mhm,
think that leads to things like the degradation of our climate, of our earth, of our own
mhm,
physical bodies.
mhm,
So mind is the builder, and we need to be very careful what we're building in the mind. And I really believe that the physical body has its own kind of wisdom, that it's always imparting to us. And that as we listen to that wisdom, indigenous people know this. as we listen to our physical earth, our mother, and our physical bodies, there's a whole nother layer of wisdom and information that we can use in order to heal ourselves, in order to heal our world. So that's a very important concept that I find in Buddhism, but I also find it in the Cayce readings. We just finished doing a Temple Beautiful program. I mean, the Temple Beautiful was Cayce's um, idea of really elevating somatic wisdom, the physical body, the senses, the arts. So that's one idea. A second idea that I think is so important in the Cayce readings and in Buddhism is, well, it's a twofold idea. One is that we're deeply interconnected with something bigger than we are. Cayce calls
Mhm.
it oneness. The Buddhists call it dharmadhatu. It is a Sanskrit word that means everything is included, nothing is left out. And it's not just that we're connected, we are interconnected, we inter-are. So that kind of takes us beyond the conceptual mind that you are because I am, that I am because you are. There's something so deeply interconnected about us that we couldn't exist without each other. And then from that, the question arises, how do I manifest that oneness, that dharmadhatu in my personal life? That's the personal spiritual ideal that Cayce says is the most important experience and activity of any lifetime. That's what really struck me when I began to study the Cayce material.
Mhm.
In almost every reading, he comes back to the personal spiritual ideal. And I remember um, when I first encountered the Cayce readings, I wanted to know what a spiritual ideal was and why it was so important. And it really has been a lifelong journey and mission to continue to deepen my connection with those ideas and experiences of those ideas.
Hmm.
So you're saying there's so many interesting things you said. I'm just like trying to unpack a few. Um, but this last thing you said about the spiritual ideal, could you say a little more about that? And is that something you choose once and then you just keep that your whole life? Or how does having a spiritual ideal connect you to the one force, the one source, the oneness?
Yeah. Well, there are just some beautiful excerpts in Cayce readings that talk about this interconnection between oneness, between the whole, and between our unique manifestation of the whole. Each one of us, I believe, is called to live, to manifest, to bring into this dimension qualities of the divine,
Mm.
which we could call our spiritual ideal. Um, and, do we just find it one time? Well, I think it is a lifetime's long journey. I think there
Mhm.
are many qualities that we are here to live, and that these qualities are interactive. So, for example, the quality of courage and the quality of compassion
Mhm.
enhance each other, support each other. I don't know that you can really be courageous without being compassionate.
Mhm.
And I know from personal experience that compassion takes courage. Do you see?
Mhm.
So I think it is, when he says it's the most important activity, I really believe that that is true because it is a lifetime's long pursuit
Yeah.
to say to the divine, I am here to express you in this dimension.
Wow.
One of our favorite meditation teachers from Buddhism is a gentleman by the name of Lama Govinda, German born, but studied Buddhism his adult life, became a Buddhist Lama. And he sort of sums it up beautifully, where he says, our purpose in this world is not to spiritualize the material, it's already spiritual. Our purpose is to materialize our spirits.
Mm,
And that's Cayce's application.
yeah. Yeah. I believe that. Mark, did you want to say something as well?
Well, I
Piggybacking.
think a word like ideal has kind of gotten lost in our culture because it gets equated with idealistic, which is almost a
Mm,
pejorative thing. Saying somebody's just idealistic, and it sort of implies they've got unrealistic aspirations that are never going to be able to be manifest. And that's almost the opposite of what Edgar Cayce meant by an ideal. He's really
mhm,
talking about something that already resides in us, but we need to make it conscious. And that whenever we're working with our motivations and our purposes and our intentions, we're really beginning to connect to that sphere. And it's not this kind of daydreaming, unrealistic way that the mind can operate. It's something that's very practical and very immediate to our life experience.
mhm. Well, the topic of our retreat that we'll be having in October is about trying to find your spiritual center during times of chaos. So, I mean, right now we are truly in a time of chaos. It seems like there's constant confusion, disorder, there's uncertainty. Um, I mean, it feels like you could pretty easily lose touch with your spiritual center. Just the daily news reports upsetting one event after the other, chaos. What's important to know? I mean, while it is important to know what's going on in the world, how do you stay centered um, in a world that seems like it's turning upside down? And do you think there's anything in the Cayce material that helps us to do that? Mark, would you start?
Yeah. Um, I think it's important for us to recognize that even though the Cayce readings were given 90 and even 100 years ago, that the human condition isn't that different. The specifics of what the chaos and the uncertainty look like may be different. But if you think about what was going on in the 1930s and the early 1940s when Casey gave the majority of his readings, the times were just as chaotic and just as unpredictable. It was just a different set of issues. There was the economic depression, where
Mm,
it may have been unpredictable whether you're going to be able to eat next week or not, or was war going to break out even more widespread than it already was? I mean, those were really difficult times of chaos and uncertainty. And so I think the way Edgar Cayce went about counseling and giving advice to individual people about how these uncertain times were impacting them and what they can do, those teachings are just as relevant. It's not like we say, oh, he didn't understand what we're dealing with now. There was no internet back then, or there was no this or no that. No, these are issues of the human spirit that have been going on for a long, long time. And so I think the core ideas in the readings have as much relevance, as much currency now as they ever have. And that's kind of what we want to explore over a long weekend at Asilomar. I don't think there's any better place in America to go for that kind of a spiritual retreat. We've both been there multiple times and know what a special place that is. And I think when we come together in community, we can
mm,
get a taste of human interaction around a common sense of purpose. We all want to wake up spiritually. And when we
mm.
can spend a weekend together, sort of taking a deep look at ourselves and what's happening and what the resources are that we can draw upon, then I think it can be a transformational kind of weekend. And that's really what we're trying to design for those 3 days in October.
It sounds wonderful. Um, so, Mary Elizabeth, did you want to add anything on to that? like finding your spiritual
Mm,
center during these really chaotic times and how the Cayce work helps with that.
yes. Um, I think all of us would agree that we really are living through a time of great uncertainty, chaos, change, craziness. And as Mark said, I think some of the best Cayce readings were given right before and during the Second World War when humanity was experiencing some of this same chaos. So, on the one hand, living through chaos really can knock us off of our spiritual center.
Mhm.
And we start to really experience that chaos within. And then it's reflected out in the world. I think Casey's constant advice, he constantly brought people back to processes, practices that helped stabilize the person who was getting the reading, stabilize us all internally. And those processes are things like meditation,
Mhm.
like studying wisdom traditions, reflecting on them, experimenting with them to see what's true for us and what is not. In other words, continuing to cultivate a connection with our spiritual center. The Buddhists would say, and I think Cayce would agree, that really the root of suffering is when we lose the connection with our spiritual center. And I think we could all agree that we have so many distractions and so many ways to get off track in our modern world. And it really takes an act of healthy will to say,
Mm.
every day, I set aside time to reconnect with what's important to me and what's important about me, with my values and my ideals. Every day, I remember why I'm here and who I am. Every day, I connect with others through prayer and meditation. Every day, I stabilize myself so that when chaos is raging around me, I can see clearly what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do. So it works both ways. We get knocked off our spiritual center because of the chaos. And when we're not cultivating our spiritual center, we actually contribute to the chaos and the suffering because we become internally chaotic.
Mm.
So you're saying it starts here with the individual, with yourself. You have a responsibility. I remember Casey readings talking about budgeting time, like budget time for recreation, budget time for play. But this would also be, in addition to budget the time, it's just like using your will to get you into that chair to meditate or other
Mm.
practices that hopefully you guys will share with us at
Right.
Asilomar for keeping your center.
Yeah.
And that makes so much sense because sometimes when you listen to the news, it's almost like a wave just knocking you over, just like the upset and that you're feeling for other people that are going through so many things. Like, I think right now the floods in Texas and just other things that are going on around the world. Um, so that makes so much sense that you have a responsibility or that you have the power, really. You have the power to stabilize yourself through these practices.
Right. And we
Um,
know when we're stable, we create points of stability in others. We invite them into that stability. Again, back to our one of our favorite meditation teachers, Lama Govinda, he says what starts out as a discipline can quickly evolve into a devotion. So when you wake up in the morning and you say, my day won't be the same unless I take some time here to get oriented,
Mhm.
to connect with what's important to me. And then I have a very different kind of day.
That sounds like it's a good argument for doing your your practices in the morning before you go out into the chaos of the world. If you can make that time, I mean, it doesn't have to be that much time, right? It could be 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes,
Mhm.
whatever you can find. But that makes so much sense because I can see that working not just for yourself, but you as a node, even in your own family. Like if you're the only person in the family doing that, you could bring that stability on a family level. And then I suppose there's that ripple effect where it can go out to help others. So we've kind of been talking about how to find some stability and uncertainty during times of great change. And I think at some point, Mark, you had mentioned to me that we need a new relationship to uncertainty and change. I was wondering if you could just speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's I think an important point that Mary Elizabeth and I have been talking about it as we're starting to shape our presentations for early October. And, most of the people who came to Edgar Cayce for advice were going through some kind of change. They had some measure of uncertainty or instability or in a transition of some sort. And I think much of the counsel that he gave to those individuals, and it's counsel that we can then apply to ourselves today, has to do with how we even look at change and uncertainty. And are we able to see these phases that are called liminal phases, where something that's been going on is sort of dying away and the new hasn't emerged yet, and we're kind of in that middle ground that's so uncomfortable. And
Mm.
probably that collectively we're going through that right now. But what's our relationship to those liminal experiences? And in a way, we need to be able to to make friends with uncertainty, to make friends with change. And we'd like at the Asilomar program to look at a few case histories. I think sometimes when there's a story it can come alive about a particular person who came to Edgar Cayce and the situation they were in, and the kind of counsel that he gave them, and then what they did with it. And these stories are really, I think, inspiring about how you and I can begin to shape a different kind of relationship where we're not ashamed of change and uncertainty. We don't fight against it, but we in a sense, learn from it and we embrace it. And that's going to be one of the themes for our weekend together at Asilomar.
Wow, that sounds really interesting and challenging, I must say, because oftentimes when people think about change, it's like, oh, I like things the way they are. I don't want any change, you
Oh,
know? Or I do want some change, but I'm not sure if it's going to work out the way I like it. So then you're resistant to it on that level.
yeah. Well, and Mary Elizabeth, you want to share some of the ideas we've been talking about on the nature of uncertainty?
Well, yeah, I think when we think about change, there really are some kinds of change that we like, and then there are changes that we don't like. So I may want a new job. I may want a new friend. I may want to lose 10 pounds. I want to change. I don't want those changes over there, though. You I don't want people I love to die. I don't want to
Right.
lose my pet, you see?
Yeah.
So as we explore this whole relationship with change, I think really we need to change our minds about the way we see change. When you come into this material dimension, which is a spiritual dimension, it's all about change. The Buddhists call it impermanence. So it's like we've come into a dimension and we say we don't like this dimension. We don't like what it's all about. Instead, we could say, I'm going to befriend change because that's what is happening here. That is the
Mhm.
reality of what's happening here. This dimension is all about change. So let me find out how I can possibly influence this movement, this constant movement in positive ways, because we can.
Mhm.
our ideals, through our attitudes, through just accepting that things are moving and changing in every moment. I mean, Casey said every 7 years, the whole body has changed. Do we want to stop that? I don't think so. But do you see how we can influence it so those changes are positive and healing and transforming? We can also work with change to mitigate the negative effects of change. But first, we have to accept that we are living in the dimension of change. We need to move with that energy, bring our ideals and our values into how we move with that energy. And as Mark says, befriend the dimension that we're in and not deny it or fight with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think hearing you talk about it this way, it's almost like, wow, we came into this dimension. Maybe that's why we came here, like to have this opportunity to affect change and to grow and not to be the same as we've always been. I mean, that makes it more like of a blessing. I mean, I can just hearing you talk about it makes it a lot more interesting to consider the possibilities that, change could be good.
If we're not changing and growing, then as Lama Govinda says, we're dying.
Mhm.
And, Casey says either you're choosing a positive attitude and behavior, or you're choosing a negative. Either you're choosing health and transformation and growth, or you're choosing regression.
It's always a
There's no middle
choice.
ground. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's something also about our discomfort with uncertainty.
Mhm.
It's like there's something in human psychology that um, finds uncertainty distressful. And if I can just give a little example of this that has to do with my watching sports on television. But nowadays, I'm watching a football game or a baseball game, and there's a running commentary, especially on the internet, about the probability of my team winning the game based on what the score is right at this minute. And it's like, oh, my team's ahead by 5 points. It's a basketball game. There's 8 minutes left in the game, and I can look on the internet and I can see what the calculated probability is of my team actually winning. Oh, it's 80%. Then I can relax a little bit. It's like we try to shield ourselves from the discomfort
Mhm.
that is natural to experience when things are uncertain. And can we
Mhm.
make friends with that feeling and recognize that there's something about the birth process that's always uncertain? There's something about the birth of new awareness that's going to be highly uncomfortable and not try to run away from that or use our intellect and our calculations to try to shield ourselves from that kind of uncertainty.
And also, I think with uncertainty, sometimes there's an element of safety or danger. Like, am I safe? I'm not sure what's happening here.
Mhm.
Is there a danger? So there's different grades or levels of
Yeah.
uncertainty that you can or cannot get comfortable with. So I was just thinking that, the material in the Casey readings it's nearly 100 years old. And I think you mentioned that earlier. And how relevant really is it? I mean, we've kind of been talking about this, but in the modern world, do you think it's really very relevant these days?
Yeah, I think what's really lovely, and the ARE's tried to do this, and I certainly tried to do it in the 36 years I worked there as a staff member, is to augment and complement our study of the Casey material with the best of modern science and other wisdom traditions. And I think particularly now that in the modern era we have accessible to us so many tools for finding these parallels that it really allows us to see with greater depth just how practical and applicable and timeless a lot of this wisdom is.
So, what do you think there is to be hopeful about these days, Mary Elizabeth?
Uh-huh. I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. Just as we talked about having a different relationship with change and understanding the word differently, I think we need to really think about what we mean by hope. You know, the Buddhists don't use that word, hope. They sort of discredit it. And they discredit it because in in our Western minds, and I think we can see this all around us, when we talk about hope, being hopeful, it oftentimes devolves into just complaining about the way things are and wishing them to be different and wanting somebody else to make them different. It's sort of a kind of fantasy thinking that if we wish hard enough, things will change. And I think that's why the Buddhists don't like the word. But I do like the word. And I think that Cayce uses the word differently. And I think for Cayce, when he talks about hope, when we talk about hope, what we're talking about, and I think this is found in the Cayce readings, is that we have the capacity to look deeply at a problem and see the conditions and causes that brought it about. We have that mental capacity. We have the capacity to imagine how things could be better and how we, as individuals and then collectively, can change our own thinking, can change our own emotional responses and our behaviors to bring about hopeful, positive change. And that's the way I see Cayce using hope. It's not some fantasy, childish thinking, pie in the sky. It really is about taking personal responsibility for your own mind, training your own mind, changing your own mind. I ran across a quote yesterday by Albert Einstein, and he said that the measure of one's intelligence is how willing they are to change.
Mm,
And I would add to that, the measure of our spiritual maturity is our willingness to change our minds to start with. So I am very hopeful because all of the problems that we see around us, we've created ourselves.
mm,
And if we've created these problems, if we have the healthy will force, and if we're willing to look deeply into the problem, we can change things for the better. But as Cayce says, it has to start with ourselves. We have to change our own thinking. I referred earlier just to the way we view the physical and our bodies in Mother Earth. I think climate change is a direct result of believing, of thinking that this physical material dimension is less than.
mm.
And we can
Yeah,
trash it. You know, we're just
yeah,
here for a little bit, then we leave, and then maybe we come back, but we're not really taking good care. But if
right.
we were to change our thinking and really
Hmm.
see the material dimension, this physical reality as sacred,
Hmm.
I think we behave very differently toward it. Take really good care of it.
I
Get
really
ourselves out of
appreciate
that.
that. Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's coming back to the individual responsibility and taking individual action. Mark,
Mhm.
would you like to add on to that
Yeah.
beautiful discussion?
When Edgar Cayce used the word hope, it was often in conjunction with the word helpful. His phrase helpful and hopeful. And so Mary Elizabeth and I are teaching a university course every semester, including in the summer. It's not a course about Edgar Cayce, but it's a course for helping professionals. And These are young men and women, or sometimes it's people coming back to college in midlife who are working towards getting a degree in a helping profession, be it social work or counseling or conflict resolution, dozens of possibilities. And I'm really inspired by these students and the high ideals they bring to wanting to be a force for the greater good. And so that's one place where I'm really hopeful is seeing people at the beginning of their careers who really have some ideals for the greater good. And the course, though, is about what happens typically in a helping profession where burnout or compassion fatigue can
Hmm.
become a real career buster. And so, what we have tried to do in this academic course is to look at some of the science around what allows a person to be successful if they've taken on a life's work that involves helping other people. And ultimately, I think we're all helping either professionals or avocationally. We're all in families and communities, whether we've got a job title that sounds like a helping professional or not. And we all need to have ways in which we sustain our intention to be doing good in the world and not fall prey to burnout, not fall prey to compassion fatigue. And we're going to look at some of that also in the Asilomar program in October.
Well, you've both emphasized the importance of two factors, having a personal spiritual ideal and cultivating a healthy will. Um, is that going to be something you're going to focus on at Asilomar?
I think it's something we focus on in every program we do, almost with any kind of title. We're fond of this statement Edgar Cayce made to one person that somebody without an ideal is in a sorry state, but a person
Hmm.
who has an ideal and not the courage to live it is sorrier still. So it's important to have a sense of my core values and my intentionality in life. And then we also have to cultivate the courage, the will for
Yeah.
us to implement that. And I think courage also grows out of community. It's hard to do it by ourselves. We need our
Hmm.
allies. We need a group. We need an occasional retreat where we're with a whole bunch of people who share our intentions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I was wondering like how does being in a community of like-minded people help you identify your ideals, have the courage to fulfill them? How does that help?
You want to speak to that, Mary Elizabeth?
Or you might think of this retreat and being in a community of like-minded people as a really true expression of oneness and
Mm.
our connection with the divine. So just as we will be with people who are committed to a spiritual journey, to their own spiritual journey, we're going to be with people who are ready to encourage and support each other, just as the divine is there to encourage and support us. So we really kind of get a taste in spiritual community of what it's like to be held and loved and seen and valued by the divine. And we do that for one another. We come into community and we say, this is what I need, and this is what I'm willing to give. This is how I can support you. And so we really start to feel that energy moving, going out and coming back in.
Mhm.
I think it's particularly powerful when we are all committed to a certain spiritual tradition, like the Cayce readings, and have studied this material and can ask questions and move more deeply into our own spiritual journey. So I think community is one of the three, if you will, um, um, ways of moving toward enlightenment for the Buddhists. It's having a teaching, following a teacher that you respect and love, and then being in community with others who are also committed to those teachings and the teacher. And this upcoming retreat at Asilomar is exactly that.
Mm, sounds beautiful.
Meredale, just last month in June, we were at the Pacific Northwest program that, like Asilomar, has been going on within the ARE for 60 years. And that program was a little bit longer. It was 5 days as opposed to three, but it had that
Mm-hmm.
same flavor of being a community. And I was just re-impressed by the way in which coming together allows people to gain insights in almost a breakthrough sort of way that's hard to do by ourselves. And I also noticed at that retreat that there were people who were there for the first time who didn't know much of anything about Edgar Cayce. So I want somebody who might be watching this program and doesn't, know much about ARE or know much about Edgar Cayce's work to still feel very comfortable coming. I think you'll find the group to be very welcoming and embracing, and there's a place for every sort of spiritual tradition within ARE programming. And I think people will have a really special experience. They'll come in October.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, we'd love to have people come that are longtime Casey people or brand new folks. Everybody is welcome. So we're just about getting ready to wrap up here. And I was wondering if there was a particular idea or concept that you could offer us, or maybe a little meditation that we could use in our daily lives to apply some of what we've talked about here today. And then after that, we will um, wrap it up.
Mary Elizabeth, you've got a little guided experience for us.
Yeah. I love this Casey statement that mind is the builder. I think that the mind really is our greatest asset. And how we use our mind in every moment either moves us more toward this connection with ourselves and with each other and with the divine, or we can use our mind as a distraction to keep us away from that connection.
Mm.
And the meditation that I was thinking of perhaps leading people through is a meditation on oneness. Because Casey says we need to study oneness for at least 6 months to even begin to understand it. And it's not just studying oneness, it's really meditating on it, reflecting on what it means, and then taking, as I would say, taking it into our meditation. So I'd like to start for just a moment um, with this topic of we're living in chaotic times, and the chaos also resides within us. And oftentimes we're afraid to turn and even look at the chaos within us. But that's the first step. So I'm going to invite people just to take a couple deep breaths, to perhaps close your eyes or have a soft gaze. We're going to be practicing inner oneness and then oneness with each other and oneness with the divine. And as we practice inner oneness, we really need to be able to see and relax with the suffering that is even within us, the sense of inner chaos, the sense that things are out of control, the feeling that things are uncertain and changing in ways that we don't like. And we just take a moment and breathe into that discomfort and hold it tenderly, like a mother or father would tenderly hold a child who is upset. And as we hold those feelings and sensations and emotions tenderly without judgment, perhaps you can even feel how the energy shifts in and of itself. We're no longer fighting with ourselves. We're accepting what's happening right now. And it is that kind of deep acceptance and compassion and support and love that is always on offer, always there from the divine, always there in our own personal spiritual ideal. And so we allow that truth to really settle in our hearts and feel it in our bodies, that we are never alone, that we are always supported, that we are seen and valued, that we are an integral part of this mystery that we call life in this journey of enlightenment. And perhaps you can even feel the arms of the universe surrounding you and holding you tenderly. And it is in the safety of this knowing, this wisdom, that we reach out to one another and offer this comfort and this support, this compassion and this love. Very nice.
Thank you so much. Wow, I really felt like at first just like a softening and then just like a remembering of what it feels like to sit in the divine. A little more than a remembering. That was lovely. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, it's our time is coming to a close, so I'd just like to, before we sign off, and I'm truly grateful for both of you for coming, Mark and Mary Elizabeth. I'd just like to find out if there's any last words that you would like to share with our audience before we sign off. Mark?
We're just looking forward to seeing people in October. We always love coming to Northern California.
Wonderful. We're so happy that you are coming.
Yes, we are thrilled to be coming and spending time with all of you.
I can't wait to see you guys. So, on behalf of the ARE of Northern California, thank you so much for coming today. I'm truly grateful for you sharing your time and talking about the really great things you have prepared for us for Asilomar. Again, our retreat will be held at the Asilomar Conference grounds October 3rd through 5th of this year, 2025. And the title of our conference is Finding Spiritual Joy in Chaotic Times. Until next time, you can find all of our information to register and sign up for the retreat at www.edgarcayceca.org. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.